going on, but the department owns reservoirs that are miles wide, hundreds of feet deep. And so, for example, the SWRCB surface oxygenator, we have doubts as to whether that kind of approach would really get to the problem. And again, the costs associated with huge reservoirs that are providing drinking water for 25 million Californians. It's not small reservoirs we're talking about huge reservoirs. So we're very interested in continuing the point source, examining point sources as well, because we think that that is something that needs to be continued to be focused on and looked at. And so thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'm presuming in some of this work that we're also sitting down and talking closely with US EPA Superfund and DTSC, because as I looked at those, I was feeling proud of cleaning up Gambonini and all of that. But it's obviously an issue where we're closely linked. So I'm assuming that relationship is strong. Whoever wants to answer.
I think the question is the relationship strong with US EPA? And yes,
DTSC.
US EPA, we did go over and meet with them recently. So yes, we do have a good working relationship there. And I can't say the same for DTSC because I know in my region we've really had a separation of responsibility, divide up. We'll oversee one site and they'll do another. So we've had a different approach there. I think Janice on the exposure reduction could speak to the other agency that or agencies that we're really interested in working with, which are OEHA and Department of Public Health.
OEHA and Department of Public Health have been participating in our mercury exposure reduction meetings. Resources are their sticking point for them. Mm-hmm. So we already know for the exposure reduction program in the Delta, for example, they cannot give us the kind of staff resources that they were able to give to the San Francisco Bay program. So.
All right. Well, there's a lot to think about in there.
To respond to your question, we will make sure that we are coordinating on, abandoned mine issues with EPA and DTSC. It's, this is a little bit different than what they've been working on, but we'll continue to work on that.
Yeah, I figure maybe somebody is, so we'll figure out how to tie. This is sort of a team sport, dealing with this legacy and current issue, and so just trying to figure out, both from the cost perspective and the intellectual capital perspective, who can do what. How do we find the sweet spot where we can get the most done in the least amount of time, most effectively. I mean, it's a Herculean task, so. Really happy to hear the progress report and happy to help.
Quick question?
Yes, of course.
First of all, thank you for the very excellent presentation. And I was especially encouraged and very glad to see that we are looking beyond our regulatory, point source control toolbox in looking at other innovative areas upon which we might tap into, build collaboration, and address this issue. So I would encourage you to continue to think creatively beyond what we typically use as our point source control regulatory hammer, and look at other ways upon which we can reach innovative solutions. I guess my question to you or to John and Tom is, given the excellent effort that we heard about today, and the timeline that staff has proposed, is there anything in particular you need from us, the board member, right now in order to get you on your way and going out there and do good?
So we will need, as we move forward, the staff is putting together at this point kind of this suite of potential tools and ideas. And as we meet with fisheries managers and reservoir managers and other agencies, we will be looking to the board to help us with that interaction and discussions.
All right. Well,
I have some candidate reservoir managers for you to talk to, where you don't have to just go to a conference and try and find them in the lobby. So I think we can help you target the people who are most likely to be helpful, I think. Great. Well, thank you all. I am going to suggest that we take a, let's say, 12-minute break, come back at 11, trying to be realistic about that, and we will move to the executive director's report, and then our final item, which will be a public hearing of oral comments on an EIR, and or a substitute environmental document, and I would like everyone to be refreshed, caffeinated, whatever it is you need, make that phone call that's distracting you, and then we'll have total focus on the public as we should in one of those settings. So, see you in a little while.
I had to mess with it a little bit. I put on there this time requested. That's 60 minutes, but not really. For the item 6.
Okay, I'll give you 6.
No, I
Instead
don't
of
want
5.
6. I don't need 5.
Okay, I was trying to guess what you were here for. Are you going to that dinner tonight, just out of curiosity, or no?
What dinner?
At the Farm Bureau dinner that I got invited to.
Oh, no. I'm not invited to it. It's with our board.
Oh, that's hilarious. I just assumed you would be there.
Yeah, you know what? I think you ought to make an issue of it.
I will. It's just like I want to see who is there. Does that mean Cynthia won't be there? Nobody will be there?
Well, not that I'm aware of.
Oh.
I mean, she gets invited to stuff I never get invited to.
Is she more senior? She is more senior, right?
Well, she's a woman.
So bad. All right.
So I talked to Nancy yesterday. I'm going to call you at 8 when you're on the train.
Oh, yeah, I saw an appointment go through,
and she was concerned. She wasn't concerned. She asked. She says, "Well, is this, an ex parte thing? Do you need to fill out the form?"
Oh, good for her to ask.
It's about stuff that they've put on their website, so it's public. It's not about. It's just talking about.
You know what's the best thing? Always right there. Just ask Michael if it's something you have to disclose or not. That way we're just safe.
Yeah.
Because I'm not good at making the judgment. I ask him every single time. And reporting it's no
Better
big
that
deal.
way.
So
That's what he gets paid for, to keep you out of trouble.
that's right. I'm gonna
Andrea, thank you. I got shaken at this horrible cold. I'm sorry. Yeah, so. All right. Thank you. Those are good comments. You and I discussed this at one of our meetings, and this was one of the things that I flagged as being making a request for information on what. It took me a while, but
Now, this was really important.
I think so.
And it was good to be able to make the comment that, you know, remembering what's going on.
Exactly.
Because we care about it,
Yeah.
you know, and sometimes it makes us
No.
this was actually very good. And you can come visit us.
Hopefully I'll come like next week. Yeah.
But no, our new dates are nice.
Ah, so where are you in relation to the regional board office?
I met with Diane recently. We about a minute and a half.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, it's right down. It's in Franklin Valley Park.
Nice. I know what that is. Yeah.
Just the opposite corner. So it's very close. And we had a really good Frank's discussion about the fact that, yeah, they did this kind of once through. It's mostly risk communication stuff, but community's wrong. But kind of like nobody knows really what it's doing. And I get that there's a challenge. You know, I get that this is not, you know, so maybe we need a visiting force to come together and just figure out how to structure these things. But I don't know. I mean, I don't know if that's the answer. I'm just thinking about it. But it is a problem to flag so that it doesn't end up being one off every once in a while. That was my confusion. With that. So.
Yeah.
And it was great to hear about this. We got the chance to bring that back up.
Yep.
So I will be honest with you. I really just because of the dynamic of tribes, not because the things about it. So I'm kind of at a loss, but we'll talk about that more.
Okay.
All right?
And you'll be back in time for 2 o'clock.
I'm going to be back. No, I have to be in San Francisco.
Yeah, that's right. But
Yeah.
you'll be back in time
Oh,
for
yeah,
your 2 o'clock meeting.
So thank you. Take care.
Another 5 minutes. Okay. That's fine. I was going to go upstairs anyway. So I'll just go upstairs, and she can't begin until I start. So, but will you tell her when she comes out that I'm doing it because you asked her for 5 minutes?
Oh, you get my message? You probably knew about it already. Okay.
How did it go? Thanks.
Thank you very much. Now we'll move on to item 5. Mr. Howard, your report. And I want to say, as Mr. Howard gets ready, these are terrific reports, and not just for the board members, but for the public to see the status of just the myriad activities going on at the state board. They're invaluable. Thank you.
Well, I'm glad you find them helpful. Just a couple of quick issues. Tam is well aware of this, but the other two board members have probably not heard much about the Eagle Mountain Pump Storage Project, but that'll be coming to me for certification in May, it appears. We got the comments back for that, and I'll be sure to schedule, and it's in the executive director's report, but I think a final briefing for the board members would be in order prior to bringing it to me for signature. Another issue that I wanted to highlight is in the enforcement table that was prepared by the Office of Enforcement, and that is a Region 3 enforcement action against an agricultural operation and the requirement imposed on the agricultural operation to provide replacement water for a small community of I think it was a couple of hundred people. I think, as far as I'm aware, that's the first time that we have required replacement water and held an agricultural operation responsible for the nitrate pollution that results we've had that was one of the recommendations that was put into the nitrate report that the board adopted, or that was transmitted to the legislature. And I've asked the Office of Enforcement to also look at whether there are other areas where we should be pursuing that type of thing. And I think they're looking at a number of possible sites where that might be appropriate. And the only last thing, one other thing I wanted to mention, because it related to the last item, and this isn't in the executive director's report, but they were talking about the Gambanini mine, and we have an outcome card in our performance report on the Gambanini mine, which very clearly illustrates the very good outcome that's been achieved as a result of the cleanup of that site. For you, board member Diadamo, we have in our performance report outcome cards where we're trying to track actual outcomes as opposed to counting widgets. And so we have single pages that say what we're doing and then some graphics to show the improvements that we're seeing in water quality, or in some cases not an improvement because it wasn't effective. But in any event, we're learning as we go along, and both from our successes and from our, well, I won't call them failures, but not glaring successes anyway. Last thing, we've been having budget hearings. I've been at both the Senate Budget Subcommittee and the Assembly Budget Subcommittee, and surprisingly, they're not that interested in our budget. All they seem to be interested in are nitrates. In the assembly, it was just, they actually had Karen Ross, the secretary of CDFA, and I discuss nitrate issues. They didn't discuss our budget per se. However, surprisingly, they also recommended that we receive another 7 positions for our ag program there, and also 7 more for Department of Food and Ag. And that's an open item right now, since obviously it was not taken up by the Senate yet. But and at least I think at this point there's still a 2-2 vote on it. They were waiting for one of the other committee members to cast their absentee vote. And
A question on that. So that would be for the irrigated lands program?
yes. And that was all. Thank you. Unless you had some questions.
Yeah.
Just in follow-up on, I guess it was Region 3, and it's, if I'm looking at it here, it looks like page 9, the Naragi family as the responsible party.
Yes.
Okay. I think it might be helpful to have some further discussion on what would fall into that category versus what may not, is with respect to enforcement, with all of the interest, as you just mentioned, with CDFA's involvement and the stakeholders and all that. So I don't know that it would warrant, coming before the whole board, but if not, then maybe just a follow-up discussion.
All right. My understanding, by the way, in that case is that the agricultural operator actually came to the regional board and told them that he wanted to provide them replacement water, and the regional board was, delighted to have the opportunity. But then they decided, and I guess with his knowledge, that the appropriate vehicle to do this was through an enforcement action. But again, it was one that he was not opposed to.
Interesting. That's an even more interesting story. Right. It's good. All right. Any other questions? Okay, terrific. Thank you for that. Next, Mr. Howard, will you please introduce item 6?
Yes, this is the last item, is a public hearing, Division of Water Rights. We're going to get oral comments on the adequacy of the revisions to our substitute environmental document for the North Coast in-stream policy, flow policy, and Katie Lee and Dana Heinrich, and I see Paul Crater are here to present.
Good morning, Chair Marcus and members of the board. I'm Katie Lee, Senior Environmental Scientist in the Division of Water Rights Permitting and Licensing Section, and with me is Dana Heinrich and Phil Crater. I'll be introducing this agenda item, which is the public hearing for receipt of oral comments on the adequacy of the substantive revisions to the 2008 substitute environmental document prepared for the North Coast in-stream flow policy. These slides constitute a short presentation that covers some background information on the in-stream flow policy and describes the recent actions surrounding the policy. The policy was adopted in 2010 pursuant to Water Code Section 1259.4. This section of the Water Code requires adoption of principles and guidelines for maintaining in-stream flows in Northern California coastal streams for the purposes of water right administration. Consistent with the requirements of Water Code Section 1259.4, the policy encompassed coastal streams from the Mattole River to San Francisco and coastal streams entering northern San Pablo Bay. The policy extended to 5 counties, including Marin, Sonoma, portions of Napa, Mendocino, and Humboldt counties. The policy established principles and guidelines for maintaining in-stream flows for the protection of fishery resources. It prescribed protective measures regarding the season of diversion, minimum bypass flows, and maximum cumulative diversion, and contained guidelines for cumulative diversion analyses. It applied to applications to appropriate water, registrations, and petitions. In order to comply with CEQA, a substitute environmental document was prepared in lieu of an EIR. This document evaluated the potential impacts of activities that diverters might take to comply with or avoid the policy. This included the potential environmental impacts that could occur if surface water diverters were to switch to groundwater pumping in order to avoid the limitations imposed by the policy on surface water diversions. This SED document, and in particular the mitigation measures associated with the potential impacts of groundwater pumping, was the focus of a court case from Living Rivers Council. This case challenged the 2010 adoption of the policy pursuant to CEQA, and ultimately the Superior Court identified 2 inadequacies with respect to the analysis in the SED. The court issued a writ of mandate directing the State Water Board to vacate the policy and to address the 2 inadequacies as follows. Evaluate certain subterranean stream delineations as a potentially feasible mitigation measure for the anticipated increased use of percolating groundwater attributable to the policy, and present sufficient information to enable decision makers and the public to understand and consider meaningfully the limited legal options facing the State Water Board to mitigate the expected increase in use of percolating groundwater and the implications for the effectiveness of the policy. Per the court's direction, the policy was vacated in October of 2012, and State Water Board staff revised the 2008 substitute environmental document. Consistent with the writ of mandate, the revisions included an evaluation of the feasibility of adopting the subterranean stream delineation maps, clarifications concerning the State Water Board's authority over groundwater pursuant to the provisions of the Constitution and the Water Code that prohibit waste and unreasonable use, and clarifications concerning local agency regulation of groundwater within the 5 counties covered by the policy. In addition, staff incorporated a revised impact analysis to clarify that the potential switch to groundwater pumping is unlikely to have significant impact on surface water.
Good morning, Chair Marcus and board members. If I can, I'd like to add a little bit of detail and emphasize that last point. Staff, as we pointed out, we're not here today to respond to all the comments that we receive in detail. We're trying to close our comment period by receiving oral comments, and subsequent to this hearing, we're going to develop a comprehensive response to comments. But we have reviewed the written comments that were due by April 8th, and I wanted to point out for your consideration today that there appears to be confusion, and a number of the commenters felt the need to point out, contrary to what they felt staff were asserting, that pumping groundwater in the AB 2121 area can in fact affect surface flows. And we did not intend to assert that pumping groundwater doesn't have an impact on surface flows. We were trying to narrowly focus the review on the potential impact of surface flows from switching to groundwater. And so I just wanted, again, to point that out for your consideration today. We don't intend to suggest that pumping groundwater won't affect surface flows, but to suggest that it impact to surface flows from the switch to pumping groundwater to avoid the policy is unlikely to occur.
So the final item on the list of revisions was a revised mitigation measure chapter to incorporate the measures that were discussed in the final SED, but not in the draft SED. So they were all in one document. The revised SED documentation was circulated for a 45-day comment period starting February 22nd. As Phil mentioned, April 8th was a deadline for submittal of written comments. Again, the purpose of today's hearing is to provide an opportunity to submit oral comments, and staff don't intend to respond to the comments today, but plans to prepare a written response to both the oral comments and the written comments that were received. There's a clarification note at the bottom of the slide that points out that the State Water Board will not consider approval of the CEQA documentation or adoption of the policy during today's hearing. Those considerations will take place at a future board proceeding. So unless there are any questions, that concludes my presentation.
Terrific. We'll move to public comment. We have 2 blue speaker cards. If anybody else wishes to speak, please get a card and fill it out. Our first speaker will be Danny Merkley from the California Farm Bureau, who I've graciously given 1/10 of the amount of time he's asked for.
Thank you, Madam
I'll leave
Chair.
it at that.
Members. Danny Merkley, the California Farm Bureau. we're here primarily, I'm here primarily to express our support for the Mendocino County Farm Bureau's comments that were submitted. I will save time by not going through what they submitted. Their comments were fairly general because we understand the 5-year review or update is coming up in the future, and they'll probably submit more substantial comments at that time. I think it's important, and based on the earlier comment, when I was working on getting our membership up and down the state to understand part of the comprehensive water package that passed in 2009 specific to surface water diversion and use reporting, there's a lot of confusion about subterranean streams. People didn't know what they were. They weren't sure when they might be impacting one or those kinds of things. And that could lead to maybe some of the confusion that you saw in some of the letters. So anything we can do to help clarify for folks if they are, in fact, pulling from a subterranean stream when they're pumping, when they think they're pumping groundwater, that would help quite a bit. Lastly, I'll close with my 1/6 of the time I requested by saying that this is a very complex issue, and it's going to take some more time to work through it. And we hope that that we will take the time to make sure we get this right in that 5-county or portion of a 5-county area. So thank you.
Thank you. So the issue, so that I do understand it, is both us making the document clearer to avoid the confusion people have, but a broader issue of people just being confused about this subject generally.
Well, when it comes to percolating groundwater or subterranean streams, I think you don't see it like you do a surface.
Right.
Surface
People
water
haven't
or
had
a
to
stream.
think about it before.
So it's a challenge, and then sometimes it's a challenge for folks to do the research to figure out if
Right.
a certain reach of a stream has been designated as coming from a subterranean stream. You know, sometimes it's real easy. You start pumping and you see a stream go down. Other times it's not so simple.
Right.
Okay?
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks very much. Our next speaker is Chandra Ferrari from Trout Unlimited.
Thank you, Chair Marcus and members of the board. My name is Chandra Ferrari. I am California Water Policy Director with Trout Unlimited. And I'm actually here on behalf of Brian Johnson, who has been extensively involved in this proceeding, but regrettably could not be here today. As many of you know, or probably all of you know by now, TU was sponsor of AB 2121, which mandated development of this policy, and we have been really extensively involved in all aspects of development ever since. We support readoption as quickly as possible. But we do have a couple quick concerns with some of the statements that were made in the substitute environmental document relating primarily to groundwater and subterranean streams. So similarly to the last speaker, I think it mainly revolves around confusion and asking for some clarity in the document. So specifically, we are concerned that statements in the document lead to the impression that the Water Board is not committed to regulating subterranean streams equally with other waters under its permitting jurisdiction because of the complexity of doing so. And unfortunately, we think some of the division enforcement actions also convey the same impression because they tend to focus on unpermitted diversions that are easiest to identify as opposed to maybe those that might be more meaningful to fish and wildlife uses or senior water right diverters. And that's primarily because of the main method used for enforcement. The aerial surveys can spot the storage ponds much easier than they could unpermitted surface or subterranean diversions. So we have 3 primary recommendations. And the first is to provide clarity in the substitute environmental document that the Water Board intends to regulate subterranean streams as aggressively as it regulates diversions to storage. The second is to work with Fish and Wildlife to refine methods for permitting sweeps to focus on the greatest threats to aquatic resources and senior water right holders as opposed to diversions that are just easiest to identify, although those clearly are also important also. And finally, to work with stakeholders to reconsider whether and how to adopt subterranean stream delineations or otherwise adopt guidance for landowners or for landowners who might be pulling from a subterranean stream. And I recognize that this third point is really going to be difficult and complex and not easy. So we would recommend that the board maybe consider adopting the policy now, but then putting in place a process with defined timetables and process for amending it in the future to provide guidance to landowners on this issue. And I understand that there is the 5-year policy update, and it might be appropriate to try to have a framework within that time so that we're ready to amend the policy at that time to provide guidance to those landowners. And other than that, I would just refer you to the written comment submitted by Brian Johnson and just reaffirm that TU is committed to this process and to doing whatever we can to see it through. And we think it's very important to improving the aquatic resources in the coastal streams.
Right.
So thank you.
Thank you very much. Any clarification, staff, you'd like to make now? It's not necessarily a response to comment, but presumably you're taking all of that in and considering it and what you'll eventually bring to us.
Of course, yes, we will address those, but I don't think we have any clarifications at this time, so thank you.
Right. Anything else, staff? Do I have to say magic words to adjourn, or with that we stand adjourned? Thank you all for your time. We sit adjourned, yes. Thank you.
all last week, but I'm still tired. So.
You're still trying to get better. Look at all that stuff.
No, I'm glad that